A dim, unlit road stretches ahead, and an approaching car throws harsh high beams directly toward you. As usual, you turn your gaze slightly away, but the glare still hits. For a brief moment, the road disappears, replaced by a faint, washed-out blur exactly where you were looking. You continue driving through it, waiting for the white line to reappear. Eventually it does. You move forward, and by the next turn, the moment is already forgotten. Yet, that brief gap has a measurable duration. Scientists study it in controlled environments, and it even has a name. What is surprising is how much it differs between people whose vision is otherwise perfectly healthy. Some drivers regain clarity in about 6 seconds, while others take over 30. Same eye chart results, same prescriptions, yet a 6 times difference in how long they are effectively driving blind. The factor behind this difference lies in a tiny area of your retina, smaller than a grain of rice. It depends on 3 pigments, 2 of which come directly from the food you consume. The third is more unusual, but its role becomes clearer once the underlying issue is understood. The timing comes first. When a sensation can be measured, it becomes a physical trait of your body, just like your height. And this one has been part of you for as long as you have driven at night. There is no need to write anything down here. The practical applications are already organized into 55 illustrated protocols, each supported by scientific explanation, available in a manual link below. This will not be mentioned again. The term for this interval is photo stress recovery time. In laboratory tests, a bright light shines into the eye for several seconds, and then a timer measures how long it takes before fine details can be seen again. Among healthy adults, the average is about 12 seconds, though the range spans widely across individuals. Age and corrective lenses do not explain the variation. Standard eye charts at the optician only measure how well you see in stable lighting, while this measures how quickly the center of your retina recovers after being overwhelmed. The two are largely unrelated. 2 people may read the same smallest line on a chart, but still fall at completely different points on the recovery spectrum. This measurement is not part of routine eye exams. However, doctors use it when diagnosing problems because it helps pinpoint where an issue lies. After controlled exposure to bright light, a weakened macula takes significantly longer to restore vision, while damage to the optic nerve barely changes the recovery time. A prolonged delay directs attention to a specific area. Outside a clinical setting, your own recovery time goes unnoticed because those seconds pass while you're focused on staying in your lane. And since no one compares these intervals, a passenger beside you may regain clear vision several seconds before you do, yet neither of you would realize it because each assumes the other sees the same thing. What is actually happening during recovery is something you have already observed from within. Each photoreceptor in your eye stores light-sensitive pigment. Every photon it absorbs uses up part of that supply, bleaching it until biological processes restore it again. Bright headlights deplete the supply faster than it can be replenished, and the lingering pale blur you see afterward is essentially a map of those temporarily bleached cells. If you pay attention, you might notice that the blur shifts in color as it fades, moving from bright white through shades of violet and green before disappearing entirely. This reflects different pigments regenerating at different speeds, each signaling its progress through color changes. The delay you experience on that dark road is the time it takes for this replenishment process, which leads to a deeper question. White light contains all colors, so which part causes the most disruption? Light travels in packets, and the energy of each packet increases as its wavelength shortens. A blue photon, around 450 nanometers, carries roughly 40% more energy than a red photon at about 630 nanometers. So within white light, blue light delivers more impact per particle. That is one reason, though not the main one. The more significant factor is geometry. Your eye focuses light using a single lens, and all simple lenses bend shorter wavelengths more strongly than longer ones. Camera engineers correct this by combining multiple types of glass into one lens system. Your eye does not have that advantage. Opticians measure focusing differences in diopters, and the gap between where red and blue light come into focus in your eye spans more than one full diopter, equivalent to a real prescription difference built into every healthy eye. The focus is set near the middle of the spectrum, in the yellow-green range, where daylight is strongest and visual detail is sharpest. Blue light is a compromise. While red and green wavelengths focus sharply on the retina, blue light is already focused slightly in front of it, reaching the retina as a spread-out blur. This blur covers a wide area, stimulating many densely packed cones at once, each contributing to a sense of haze. Every image you have ever seen includes this soft blue layer overlaying the sharper details beneath. You have already encountered the blue layer on its own. Deep blue text on a dark storefront often seems to float and resist focus no matter how hard you try. And a line of blue decorative lights turns blurry at a distance where nearby white lights remain sharp. The lens simply has no precise place to bring that color into focus. So the haze you see is actually an accurate representation. Your first defense mechanism, the pupil, is not enough either. It constricts within a fraction of a second when exposed to bright light, but even at its smallest, it only reduces incoming light by about 16 times. The jump in brightness from a dark road to an approaching headlight exceeds that limit by far. Whatever light gets through still lands on the retina, including that spread-out blue disc. Modern headlight design has also made things more difficult. Older halogen bulbs produced a warmer, yellowish light with relatively little deep blue content. Newer white lights, however, are intentionally designed to be much richer in blue wavelengths. As a result, oncoming traffic today truly appears harsher than it did decades ago, and that added harshness lies mainly in the wavelengths that blur the most. In normal daylight, this mismatch is mostly hidden because blue light forms only a modest portion of natural light, and your brain continuously corrects for it. But when facing headlights, there is no room for correction. The beam is saturated with short wavelengths. The blur spreads across the exact area of the retina you rely on for steering, and the veil you experience on that dark road is simply the blue layer fully revealed, now strong enough to overwhelm the sharper image beneath it. A flaw this consistent and predictable might seem to demand a built-in optical solution, such as a filter designed to reduce troublesome wavelengths before they reach the retina. In fact, your eye already has one. At the center of your retina lies the macula, and within it, the fovea, a tiny depression less than a millimeter wide that handles all of your sharp vision. Every word you have read, every face you have recognized, and every lane marker you have followed at night has been processed through this small region. The rest of the retina provides context, but this central pit is the primary instrument. Positioned directly in front of these central photoreceptors is a yellow pigment that absorbs light most strongly around 460 nanometers, precisely where blue light causes the most disruption. Early anatomists could even observe it directly during dissections as a faint golden tint at the center of the otherwise transparent retina, which led them to call this area the yellow spot. For a time, some believed it was simply a byproduct of death, a discoloration rather than a functional feature, but that idea did not last. Today, it is simply known as macular pigment, and its importance is clear. Its placement is key. Every photon heading toward your most sensitive visual cells must pass through this layer first, meaning blue light is partially filtered before it can spread across the retina. The pigment is arranged in a bullseye pattern, with the highest density at the center of your gaze and gradually fading outward within a few degrees. It is essentially a filter shaped exactly like the area it protects, positioned precisely where an optical engineer would place it, directly in front of the detector. Your eye has carried this system since early development. The lens at the front of the eye also absorbs some blue light over time through its own slow chemical changes, but the retinal filter is separate and originates through a completely different biological process. What makes this design especially efficient is that the very center of the fovea contains almost no blue-sensitive cones. The sharpest details you perceive rely mainly on red and green signals, with blue information added from surrounding areas. Since blue contributes more to blur than to fine detail, filtering it out comes with almost no cost of visual clarity. In effect, the system removes the haze while preserving the image. Under certain conditions, you can even perceive this filter yourself. A uniform white screen on a modern display emits polarized light, and the pigment absorbs polarized blue unevenly. Some people notice a faint yellowish bow tie shape at the center of their vision that fades after a few seconds. This fleeting shape is your own internal filter becoming visible to you. Scientists can measure its density non-invasively using a clever method. A blue light and a green light alternate rapidly at the center of your gaze, and the blue intensity is adjusted until flickering appears to stop. That point reveals how much blue light the pigment has absorbed. The process involves no physical contact. Your own perception acts as a measuring tool, allowing researchers to determine the thickness of a layer thinner than paper. This measurement is called macular pigment optical density, and it varies widely among healthy individuals. Some people have filters several times denser than others, even when their vision tests appear identical. This variation mirrors the wide differences seen in recovery times after bright light exposure, suggesting a direct connection. You now understand that the filter exists where it is located, and that its thickness can be measured to the pupil of a living eye. At this stage, the question naturally shifts. A structure that is fixed in the body would normally appear fairly consistent from one person to another, much like corneas or lenses do. So what kind of supply system could leave two healthy retinas so different in this case? The explanation begins in something as ordinary as the produce aisle. In the plant world, there are roughly 800 known carotenoids, the pigment group responsible for the colors of autumn leaves, maize, marigolds, and the bright flesh of peppers. The human body cannot create any of these from scratch. Every carotenoid present in your system has been eaten, absorbed, and transported internally. Out of those hundreds, only 3 are allowed into the macula. 2 of them are familiar from nutrition labels: lutein and zeaxanthin, found mainly in dark leafy greens, and a limited range of yellow and orange foods. The third is more unusual and requires a deeper explanation. Entry into the macula is highly selective. Your liver stores a wide variety of carotenoids, and beta-carotene, for example, can accumulate in the skin to the point where heavy carrot consumption gives the palms an orange tint. Yet none of those related compounds are permitted into the macula. Only 2 specific molecules are accepted, while all others are excluded. Such strict selection typically indicates a tissue that cannot tolerate errors, and the retina is one of the few parts of the body that does not regenerate. You have likely seen these selected pigments before without realizing it. The rich yellow of an egg yolk comes from the same pair of pigments, stored there by the hen through its diet. What serves as a visual filter in one organism becomes a nutritional source in another. Both lutein and zeaxanthin are suited to their role due to their chemical structure. Each molecule contains small oxygen-bearing groups at both ends, allowing it to align across cell membranes like a support beam anchored in place, rather than drifting freely. Molecules arranged in this way can remain stable within tissue for long periods, absorbing and neutralizing excess energy where they are positioned. Their journey into the eye involves a complex transport system. After being consumed alongside dietary fats, they enter the bloodstream carried by cholesterol-rich particles. Over time, the retina draws from this circulating supply. As a result, the density of the filter in your eye today reflects a long-term average of your diet, not just recent meals. Along this pathway, losses occur at every stage. Only a portion of what is present in food survives digestion and enters the bloodstream, and the retina captures only part of that circulating amount. Individual differences in digestion, transport, and cellular uptake further widen the variation, which helps explain how people with similar diets can still develop filters of very different strengths. This process begins even before birth. Lutein crosses the placenta, appears in umbilical cord blood, and is present in breast milk. That means an infant's fovea is already building its protective filter months before the child begins eating independently, relying entirely on nutrients supplied by another person. The selection process inside the retina is highly organized. Specific binding proteins exist for each pigment, one that recognizes lutein and another for zeaxanthin. These proteins guide the pigments into distinct regions. Zeaxanthin concentrates heavily at the very center of the fovea, forming the majority of the pigment there, while lutein spreads more broadly throughout the surrounding tissue. Researchers have mapped this distribution in detail, showing how precisely each molecule is placed. The proportions are also uneven. Diets typically provide more lutein than zeaxanthin, yet the retina prioritizes the rarer pigment at its center. This pattern cannot be explained by supply alone and suggests a deliberate biological arrangement. The strongest optical protection is positioned exactly where the most sensitive visual cells are located, gradually decreasing outward from the point used for reading, recognizing faces, and guiding movement. No engineer designed it on paper, yet imaging reveals a structure that appears carefully planned. and every bit of it originated from food. On a dark road, once you become aware of recovery times, a personal rule often develops. After a bright oncoming vehicle passes, you instinctively slow down and maintain that reduced speed until the white line ahead becomes fully clear again, no matter how long it takes. At this stage, 2 of the 3 key pigments have been traced back to dietary sources. The third does not follow that path. So what accounts for the pigment found at the very center of the macula in everyone? That pigment is mesozeaxanthin. When scientists search for it in common foods, they find almost nothing. Only trace amounts in shrimp shells or the skin of certain fish, and virtually none in plants that supply the other 2 pigments. It is not something people consume in meaningful quantities, yet it is consistently present in the human eye, concentrated at the point of sharpest vision. For many years, its origin remained unclear, appearing on biochemical maps without a known source. The explanation lies within the eye itself. Behind the photoreceptor sits a thin layer of dark cells known as a retinal pigment epithelium, which acts as a maintenance system for the retina. Within this layer is an enzyme called RPE65. This enzyme is best known for its primary role in vision, restoring the light-sensitive molecules that are depleted during exposure to light. The bleached pigments that you experience while driving at night are continuously rebuilt through this process, allowing vision to function smoothly. This restoration cycle runs millions of times each day. Anyone who has walked from bright daylight into a dark cinema has experienced this system working at full capacity. For the first few minutes, the room feels almost completely dark, and then, gradually, it begins to brighten on its own, row by row over the next 15 minutes. The screen itself has not changed. What you are witnessing is your pigment supply being restored, and that growing brightness is the rebuilding process becoming visible. The importance of this primary function becomes clear when it fails. Children born with a defective version of this enzyme often lose useful vision early in life, and the first gene therapy ever approved for an inherited eye disorder was developed specifically to restore functional copies of it. Modern medicine has invested heavily in this single protein. Alongside its main role, it also performs a secondary task. When lutein is present, the enzyme carries out an additional reaction, shifting a single double bond along the molecule's chain while leaving its overall structure unchanged. This subtle rearrangement produces mesozeaxanthin. That newly formed pigment then moves forward into the fovea and becomes part of the central filter. This secondary role is less surprising when you consider that the enzyme specializes in carotenoid chemistry. The visual pigment it helps regenerate belongs to the same molecular family that it now modifies. The evidence supporting this process is well established in studies involving chicken and quail retinas, as well as cultured cells equipped with the human version of the enzyme. Lutein is converted into mesozeaxanthin through the action of this single protein. Researchers, including Ranganathan and colleagues, have traced this pathway in detail. Work with primates strengthens the case further. Monkeys raised on diets completely lacking carotenoids show no macular pigment at all. However, when these animals are fed only lutein, without any direct source of mesozeaxanthin, they still develop it within their retinas. This indicates that the pigment is produced internally. Observations within the human eye support this pattern. Moving toward the center of the fovea, the proportion of lutein decreases while mesozeaxanthin increases step by step, suggesting that one is being used to create the other. While no one has directly observed this conversion taking place inside a living human eye, the combined evidence from animal studies, cell experiments, and biochemical mapping forms a strong and consistent explanation. Researchers describe the process as slow and limited rather than highly active, more like a small-scale operation compared to the enzyme's primary function, yet sufficient because the area it serves is extremely small. 2 points, however, are firmly established. This pigment is present at the center of nearly every human fovea, and it does not come directly from the diet. When viewed as a whole, the system reveals a clear pattern. The central region of your fovea, arguably the most valuable fraction of a millimeter in your body, is composed largely of the zeaxanthin family of pigments. Where dietary supply falls short at the very center, the eye compensates by converting lutein, abundant in foods like leafy greens, into a form that those foods do not provide. An enzyme responsible for maintaining vision also contributes to building the very filter that protects the cells it supports. There's a dependency built into the system. The enzyme can only modify what is delivered through diet, meaning that even the internally produced pigment ultimately originates from food. In that sense, the component you never directly consumed still began as part of a meal. The sequence is worth considering carefully. A pigment drawn from plants, carried through your bloodstream over time, delivered to the back of your eye, altered by a single molecular shift into something not found in food, and then positioned precisely over the cells responsible for vision. 3 pigments, arranged with precision, one of them produced within the eye itself. This leads to the practical question that matters most, especially on the road. What advantage does a denser filter provide? Measurements offer clear answers. Individuals with higher macular pigment density recover more quickly after exposure to bright light, maintain visibility of objects under stronger glare, and experience less discomfort in identical lighting conditions. Glare testing is straightforward. A small target is placed inside a bright ring, and the ring's intensity is gradually increased until the target disappears. People with denser pigment can still detect the target at brightness levels that have already obscured it for others. Part of the glare that reaches the fovea consists of short wavelength light, and a thicker filter removes more of this interference before it can affect perception. This is the mechanism behind the statistical findings reported in research literature. Studies have shown that recovery speed and pigment density are moderately linked, with a negative correlation near 0.57 at the foveal center, while glare tolerance shows a positive relationship around 0.47. In simpler terms, the density of this filter accounts for roughly 1/3 of the variation in how quickly individuals recover from bright light exposure. Many other factors also contribute, but this remains one of the few measurable elements that can influence the outcome. Of course, correlation alone does not prove cause, as people who consume more nutrient-rich foods may differ in other ways as well. That is why control trials are important. In double-blind studies, participants who received lutein and zeaxanthin supplements over several months showed faster recovery times, improved tolerance to glare, and better contrast detection against blue backgrounds compared to those given a placebo. These findings, demonstrated by researchers such as Hammond and colleagues in peer-reviewed studies, confirm that the relationship is not merely observational, but can be influenced directly. The improvement against a blue background is itself a small but direct demonstration of how the mechanism works. A filter that absorbs blue light naturally darkens a blue backdrop more than the object placed in front of it, increasing contrast exactly as optical theory predicts. The object appears more distinct, not because it is brighter, but because the background is selectively reduced. Drivers have experimented with this idea for nearly a century through yellow-tinted night glasses. However, controlled studies consistently show that these glasses offer little real benefit, and the physics explains why. A uniform tint across the entire visual field reduces glare, but also dims the road itself, placing extra strain on a rod-based night vision system that is essential for low-light driving. The retina's natural filter works differently. It is localized only to the central region responsible for sharp detail, leaving peripheral vision and overall brightness largely unaffected. This is why the biological solution is more effective than external filters. It operates precisely where it is needed, without reducing overall sensitivity. The right kind of filtering must exist inside the eye, and in your case, it already does. The effects, however, are gradual and modest, developing over months rather than days because this filter is built molecule by molecule, at the same pace that dietary nutrients become biological tissue. The important outcome is directional rather than dramatic. Altering the supply of nutrients has been shown to influence the very recovery time it supports. A statement like this naturally invites stronger interpretations, but the boundaries must remain clear before any practical conclusions are drawn. Vision that has already been lost cannot be restored through these mechanisms. Once damage occurs, particularly in advanced conditions, medical treatment rather than nutrition is required. Diseases such as cataracts or advanced macular degeneration fall entirely within clinical care, and no dietary approach replaces that. The research on these pigments focuses instead on slowing decline and supporting function in eyes that are still healthy or only mildly affected. That distinction is critical. This is about preservation, not repair. The findings on glare reduction and recovery speed are based on separate, controlled evidence and apply primarily to individuals with normal vision. In these cases, a denser macular pigment is associated with shorter periods of temporary blindness after bright light exposure. The claim is precise, and the evidence supports only that level of effect. This raises a natural question. Where does your own visual system fall within this range? Before answering that, some boundaries must be set. Sudden worsening of night vision, new halos around lights, or rapidly increasing glare sensitivity are not general variations. They are potential signs of cataract, retinal disease, or other ocular conditions that require professional evaluation. In such cases, clinical examination is essential, and nutritional factors are not the primary concern. Anyone diagnosed with macular degeneration should follow their ophthalmologist's treatment plan rather than relying on general biological descriptions. There is also a simpler and often overlooked factor, optical clarity outside the eye itself. A dirty windshield or scratched glasses can scatter incoming headlights across the entire visual field, creating a false impression of internal visual decline. In many cases, simply cleaning the windshield restores more contrast than any biological adjustment. For healthy eyes, however, there is a practical self-check available. After an oncoming car passes and the road becomes safe again, the time it takes for the white lane markings to fully reappear can be used as a simple real-world measure of visual recovery. Repeating this observation over several normal drives gives a rough personal position within a natural variation range. Context matters as well, since different types of headlights and vehicle heights affect glare differently. Results under 10 seconds typically fall within a comfortable range of variation. It is also important to understand the limits of this observation. It reflects central retinal recovery, but does not capture all aspects of night vision, which involves additional systems that are not being measured here. Consistently long delays, especially those exceeding 20 seconds, are worth mentioning during a routine eye examination, not as an emergency signal, but as useful information for a clinician. Regardless of the exact number, what changes most is not the duration itself, but how it is understood. A measured interval feels more manageable than an undefined experience. Seconds may seem small, but at highway speeds, each second corresponds to roughly 30 meters of travel. The difference between faster and slower recovery spans hundreds of meters of road effectively driven without full visual clarity. This brings the focus back to the supply system that supports the filter itself. Nutrient density has a clear direction. Leafy greens such as cooked spinach and kale contain significantly higher concentrations of lutein per serving than most fruits. Egg yolks provide smaller amounts but in a highly absorbable form. Orange peppers and goji berries contribute additional zeaxanthin. Even frozen spinach retains its pigment content, since freezing does not degrade carotenoids. Cooking can actually improve availability by breaking down plant cell walls, making absorption easier. Blood levels respond within weeks after dietary changes, while the retina adjusts more slowly over months as it accumulates and redistributes these compounds. The realistic expectation is subtle. A slight reduction in how much an oncoming headlight disrupts the road, noticeable mainly when attention is directed toward it. Fat plays a crucial role in this process because carotenoids are fat-soluble. Studies have shown that absorption increases significantly when dietary fat is present. For example, adding avocado or olive oil to a salad improves carotenoid uptake compared to fat-free dressings. Without dietary fat, much of the pigment remains trapped in plant material and passes through the digestive system unused. This is not a minor detail. It is part of the delivery system itself. And so the cycle completes. The next set of headlights will arrive unchanged, and the road will still disappear for a moment. What determines how quickly it returns is a yellow filter just a few millimeters wide, positioned directly in front of the cells responsible for sharp vision. It has been there for your entire life, receiving material from decades of meals, recycling compounds internally, and quietly adjusting its density over time. Some of its components were present before you could read. Others came from recent meals, and a portion is continuously maintained by biochemical processes operating in the dark behind your retina. Tonight, as it has done countless times before, it will perform its function again without drawing attention to itself.